Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us to the second session of the seminar of the International Research Project, Collaboration Between Philosophy and Theology in the Thought of Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI. The first session was like about 1 month ago, and it was in charge of Tracy Rowland. She spoke to us about the teacher of Joseph Ratzinger, Gottlieb Zungen, and some ideas of this relationship between philosophy and theology in his thought. And now we have the honor of having here today Pablo Blanco. Pablo Blanco holds a degree in philosophy, philology, and theology. He is a doctor in the later two disciplines, philosophy and theology. He studied in Rome, Munich, and Pamplona. He has done research on aesthetics and hermeneutics, relations between faith and reason, ecumenism, and the theology of the sacraments. He is currently a research professor at the University of Navarra, Spain. He is a very well-known scholar specialized in the thought of Joseph Ratzinger. He has written a lot of books. I have here two in my hand. One of them is this great biography, one of the most important biographies of Benedict XVI. And I have also this one. This is a great book on the reason and Christianity. And many other books he has written about Ratzinger and Benedict XVI, including an introduction to his theology. He's co-editor right now, together with Tracy Rowland and Rudy Albino, of the forthcoming Ratzinger Lexicon, which will be published in English, Spanish, and German. Today, Pablo Blanco will speak to us about how we know God. The subtitle of this presentation is Thomas Aquinas in the Writings of Joseph Ratzinger. Everybody knows that Joseph Ratzinger is not famous for being a Thomist. He's more well known for being an Augustinian and a Bonaventurian. Is that how you call it, Bonaventurian? Well, but not Thomas Aquinas. Well, let's see what Pablo Blanco can tell us about this today. Thomas Aquinas in the Writings of Joseph Ratzinger, how we know God. So, Don Pablo, thank you very much for accepting this invitation. It is a great honor to have you with us here. And well, we chose to speak in English, so we have people from different countries, so everyone can have access and understanding of this interesting presentation. Welcome, Don Pablo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you for this generous presentation. Well, I was told to speak for an hour. And I think this is my first time in my life that I am going to speak so long. So let's start with this marathon. So the title of my presentation is Thomas Aquinas, the Unknown Master of Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI. And the subtitle is Thomistic Themes of Ratzingerian Theology. Along with the diversity of sources of Joseph Ratzinger's theology, we can appreciate that love, truth, and beauty are in turn linked to the concepts of person and existence, as can also be found in the best classical theology formulated by the fathers of the church and the medieval masters. This is a constant in Ratzinger's thought. In his formative years in Freising, he did a lot of readings in those years. The novels of Dostoevsky and Gertrude von Lefort, the French literature of the time represented by Claudel and Bernanos, while also maintaining a great interest in the scientific theories of Einstein or Heisenberg, to give just a few examples. Moreover, in the domain of theology and philosophy, the voices that move us most directly were those of Romano Guardini, Joseph Pieper, or the later Catholics Theodor Hecker and Peter Wust. He also approached other philosophers of the time. Apart from the philosophy of dialogue of Ferdinand Ebner and Martin Buber, I was very interested in the existentialism of Jaspers and Heidegger, and personalism as a whole. This was key for me. And as a counterpart, I was passionate also from the beginning about Thomas Aquinas and Saint Augustine, without renouncing the nihilism of Nietzsche, the spiritualism of Bergson, or the thought of many other philosophers. The fruit of this broad erudition, form of art, science, and philosophy, has always remained sources of inspiration for Ratzinger theologian. Joseph Ratzinger's theology will always be a con-theology, a theology in continuous dialogue with the faith of the Church and with other authors, both classical and modern. In his formative years, and not only as can be seen in his extensive work, he became familiar with those who his teacher Gottlieb Schengen called the three great masters, Augustine, Thomas, Aquinas, and Bonaventure. Schengen's motto was with Saint Thomas, beyond Saint Thomas, with Augustine, beyond Augustine. In an interview during his pontificate, when he asked how the Pope prayed, he responded by alluding of these three masters. I am friends with Augustine, with Bonaventure, with Thomas Aquinas. Those saints are asked, help me. However, with respect to Aquinas, he points out elsewhere his initial difficulties with a certain type of scholasticism. I had difficulties in penetrating the thought of Thomas Aquinas, whose crystal clear logic seemed to me to be too close in it on itself, too impersonal and ready-made. According to Rossi, Ratzinger's theology was an harmonious architecture of simple lines when traced with conceptual rigor, composed a rather complicated design, but clear in its luminosity. It would have something of that simple nobility of Gothic cathedrals. He missed, however, that personal and intimate depth that he saw in the writings of Saint Augustine, but in spite of a translation of the treatise of love in the Angelical Doctor that left a deep impression on him, he was not able to find in his writings. An initial distance between Thomas and Bonaventure constituted a starting point in the thinking of the young Bavarian scholar. His initial reservations towards scholasticism are also well known when he referred to his teacher, Arnold Wilson, who taught them a rigid neo-scholastic Thomism that was simply far afield from my own questions. So Ratzinger is usually considered as a follower of the Augustinian Bonaventurian line, which he really is, but there is also an influence of Thomas Aquinas that could go unnoticed. It really appears in his text as we will try to show in these pages, especially in the unity between reflection, spirituality, and pastoral purpose. We will do this through four major themes that we have found in his writings. A, the problem of the supernatural. B, the knowledge of God. C, the doctrine of creation and ideas about the nature of faith. And D, the method of theological science. A genetic and chronological methodology will also serve us to trace this possible influence. First point, the problem of supernatural. That scholasticism seemed to Ratzinger to be a too caustic and impersonal approach, we said. However, alluding to surnaturel of Delibac, he affirmed, I admire a new interpretation of Thomas Aquinas, very different from the neo-scholastic philosophy that we have studied up to that moment. On the other hand, he affirmed of his Dr. Fata, his director of the doctoral and habilitation work, Gottlieb Schengen. He belonged to that dynamic current in Thomism that took from Thomas the passion for truth and the habit of asking unrelenting questions about the foundation and the goal of the real. But all of these he consciously placed it in relation to the questions that the philosophy asks today. In fact, the German theologian will find his points of inspiration in the thought of Aquinas. Dorothea Kees states that Ratzinger finds confirmation of his position in Thomas insofar as he has emphasized the reference of theology to the faith experience of the saints, without the former losing its relation to reality. In particular, Augustine's and Bonaventure's exposition of the simple seems to him to be related to Thomas' affirmation that love is the eye that lets man see. It thus combines both perspectives, truth and love. Tracy Rowland, winner of the 2020 Ratzinger Prize and a connoisseur of 20th century neo-scholasticism, considers that throughout his work he refers to the position of St. Thomas, whenever he finds in it a valuable intuition. In fact, she speaks about Ratzinger's Augustinian Thomism. In his doctoral thesis on Augustinian ecclesiology, there are four mentions to the Summa Theologiae, in which he appreciates a different relationship between natural and supernatural, as well as in what refers to the proof of the existence of God. While Augustine proposed an interior way of access to God, Aquinas does it through the sensible things and using the concept of causality in a purely metaphysical sense. Thus, Ratzinger points out that between the two, there are a different conception of being and knowledge, although he does not accept the dichotomy proposed by Max Seller between Augustinian religious knowledge and Thomistic metaphysical knowledge. For Augustine, in reality, the two are intimately united. As a point of confluence between the two authors, Thomas Aquinas sees the res sacramenti of the Eucharist in the unitas corporis mystici, the fruit of the sacrament of sacraments. Also in his writings on Saint Bonaventure, Ratzinger made some other approaches to the thought of Saint Thomas. Here, the differences are reflected in the gnoseology, which give rise to the ontological orientation of Thomism and the historical salvific orientation of Bonaventure, respectively. Thus, we will find differences in the doctrine on revelation in theological anthropology or in the doctrine of grace, which are mainly the three great themes that Ratzinger will take from Thomas Aquinas according to Schenck. In turn, throughout his 1955 habilitation thesis, he insists that both perspectives are complementary, since neither of them exhaust all the richness of Christian truth. Bonaventure also made a synthesis between the Augustinian theory of interior illumination and that of Aristotle's abstraction, while on the contrary, Aquinas opted unilaterally for the Aristotelian one. According to him, one can only speak of divine illumination because that light proper to human reason has been created by God and, in that sense, is a participation in the light of God. Therefore, also for Thomas, there is no internal revelation because, like all knowledge, revelation also comes from outside. It is a complete fact concluded once and for all. He also noticed that the paradox that he has granted to the historical event of the rank of positive origin in the salvific event. The meaning of revelatio will not be for Thomas Aquinas subjective but objective, thus passing to an objectivation of the relational act of revelation, although he clearly distinguishes between faith and revelation, unlike the seraphic doctor. Both Thomas and Bonaventure participated in the preparation of the Second Unionist Council of Lyons, assisting Urban IV, the true inspirer of that event, and they both held that the filioque was a dogma, although each saw it from his own ontological or salvific historical perspective, respectively. Thomas distinguished in the first part of the Summa Theologiae the right and even the duty of the Church to define her faith more precisely. There is then the paradox that heresies contribute to the organic development of dogma to make it more concrete and explicit, and in this process, papal authority is decisive. Less concurring, however, will be the developments in anthropology and more specifically on the theme of the relationship between natural and the supernatural. Ratzinger points out that the abstraction of the concept of nature can lead to a certain anthropological dualism, such as could be derived from the Bonaventurian conception. In this sense, Aquinas' metaphysical thought had something liberating about it, for before God, every creature is nature, whether it is the spirit, the body of the inanimate things of the world. The metaphysical concept of human nature was necessary to renew the Pauline spirit. However, by reducing the concept of grace to the salvific grace obtained in Jesus Christ, the grace of creation fell into oblivion. With this, nature is relegated to a certain metaphysical neutrality in which is necessary dependence on grace, and its irreducible metaphysical character are no longer sufficiently clear. Moreover, the separation of nature and spirit can be an expression of the truly Christian reality to which Thomas does not do justice. In any case, Ratzinger once again insists on the complementarity of Thomistic and Bonaventurian conceptions. Thus, the Thomistic conception of supernaturalism prevailed in Catholic theology. Ratzinger relates it to the Bonaventurian concept of desiderium naturalis, contrary to what was thought at the time. He thus places Bonaventure in the line of spiritual evolution that had logically led to Thomas Aquinas. However, he insists that the Thomistic concept of supernaturalism carried the danger of overlooking the immediate openness of the creature to the Creator. In contrast, the Bonaventurian concept of supernaturalism reflects better the relational character of grace. Similarly, Thomas and Bonaventure did not understand the person seen as Imago Dei in the same way, according to their respective dynamic, actual, and static substantial conceptions. While Bonaventure addressed the question in the knowledge of God, Aquinas dealt with it in anthropology. According to Ratzinger, Thomas Aquinas was more concerned with the spiritual nature of the person than with actualitas. Thus, in Thomas, everything shifts. The question of the act and the object becomes, for the first time, separable. The angelic doctor based the doctrine of grace on his concept of the supernatural in order to make it compressible to Aristotelian ontology. This was his great achievement, but Aristotelianism had already been replaced by other philosophical systems at the beginning of the 20th century in theology. So a new theological synthesis was necessary. Thomas spoke of supernature as elevated, transformed, and divine nature. He placed special emphasis on the axiom gratia presupponet naturam. At the same time, however, he was relegating to the background the historical salvific distinctions Ratzinger argued, but at the same time, he was relegating to the background the historical salvific distinctions. The second point is the knowledge of God. This leads us to rethink the relationship between philosophy and theology. For Ratzinger, Thomas represents the line of theology understood as philosophia supernaturalis, proper to the objective metaphysical approach, while Bonaventure sees it as a practical science nearer to a historical concrete perspective. The angelic doctor grounded theology in scientific knowledge and precisely in his activity by which the intellect draws conclusions from the articles of faith. The true essence of theological science is seen. This will be understood above as through faith ad fides querens intellectum, against the theory of the double truth proposed in the 13th century by Siger of Brabant. Aquinas suggested a subtle formula of reconciliation between faith and reason, much more elaborate than that of Bonaventure. The problem consisted in understanding the unity and difference between philosophy and theology without separation between the two disciplines. The seraphic doctor elaborated from 1267 onwards the anti-Aristotelianism that was not anti-Thomasian. For his part, Ratzinger always denied with Thomas the causistic or essentialist character of theology. In a later conference in 1979, he affirmed that, if I am not mistaken, it was Thomas who was the first to reach, without hesitation, the consequence of the concept of theology. The object of this science, Thomas Aquinas even speaks of subject, is God. And he concluded with the following words: theology deals with God, but it interrogates in the manner of philosophy. There is, however, an old text that appeared in 1960, dated on the 1st of St. Thomas, the previous years, and dedicated to his father, who had recently passed away. It was one of his first publications. It is the inaugural lecture in the occasion of his taking up the chair of fundamental theology at the University of Bonn, entitled The God of Faith and the God of the Philosophers. He stated there that the problem is as old as faith and philosophy being side by side, and then recalled the famous memorial of Blaise Pascal, sent into the lining of his jacket and discovered on the night of November 23-24, 1654, at the death of the French scientist and thinker. Fire, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not the God of the philosophers and wise men. In this regard, the young theologian affirmed, the mathematician and philosopher Pascal had experienced the living God, the God of faith, and in such a living encounter with the Jew of God, he understood with manifestly joyful and startled amazement how different was the irruption of the reality of God in comparison with what mathematical philosophy of Descartes, for example, knew how to say about God. If the philosophy of that time, of Descartes especially, is a philosophy from the spirit of de la géométrie, Pascal Spencer seeks to be a philosophy elaborated from the spirit de la finesse, from the understanding of the whole of reality, which penetrates it more honestly than mathematical abstraction. It consisted, therefore, in overcoming mere mathematical reason in search of an open, embroidered reason, as our theologian will later repeat time and again. To address this controversial question, Ratzinger then developed a historical contrast between Thomas Aquinas and the Swiss evangelical theologian Emil Brunner, an early companion of Karl Barth. He summarized the thought of Aquinas as follows. For Thomas, the God of religion and the God of the philosophers are perfectly compatible with each other. On the contrary, the God of faith and the God of philosophy are partially distinguished. The God of faith surpasses the God of the philosophers, adds something to him. This position went directly against the rejection of the Analogia Entis by the theologian of Basel, Karl Barth, who considered philosophy as lesser. Indeed, outside of Christian faith, philosophy is, according to Thomas, the highest possibility of the human spirit in general. Philosophy thus becomes the queen of the human sciences, above all because of the breadth of its knowledge, although it is true that faith seeks to give a new image of God higher than philosophical reason could ever set and think. For this reason, faith does not contradict the philosophical doctrine of God either, and in order to illuminate its relationship with one, would rather let the formula gratia non destruit, sed elevat et perficit naturam be applied and with meaning. Christian faith in God accepts in itself the philosophical doctrine of God and consummates it. In short, the God of Aristotle and the God of Jesus Christ are one and the same. Aristotle was known the true God, which we can know more deeply and profoundly thanks to faith, just as the vision of God in the hereafter, we will know the divine essence more closely and with greater intimacy. And so he concludes, these are 3 degrees of the same path: philosophical knowledge, knowledge by faith, and direct vision of God in eternal beatitude are different phases of the same itinerary, which contain and imply each other, as Aquinas also states. In the face of Brunner's criticism, which is harsh and categorical, Ratzinger then tried to get to the heart of the matter, to the basic uses at stake. Here it comes a question about the essence of Christianity in general, a question about the legitimacy of the concrete synthesis between Greek and biblical thought that gives form to Christianity. It is the question about the legitimacy of the coexistence of faith and philosophy, and about the validity of the Analogia Entis as a positive relationship between knowledge by reason and knowledge by faith between natural and supernatural being. In short, he puts us in the position of deciding between the Catholic and Protestant understanding of Christianity. Here then, it is the heart of the matter at hand, whether there is analogia entis and the possibility of a meeting, or on the contrary, an abyss between faith and reason, the natural and supernatural, God and man in short. It is therefore an old problem that predates Pascal, and Ratzinger concludes as follows. The fearful risk of monotheism is to call the absolute, the God of philosophers, and the God of man, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to confuse one with the other. From the point of view of monotheism, the link that Augustine established between Neoplatonic ontology and biblical knowledge of God, as Brunner affirmed, is perfectly legitimate, the concrete way in which, for him, the link between the God of the philosophers and the God of faith must be presented. Moreover, with the realization that the mute and unappealable God of the philosopher has become, in Jesus Christ, a God who speaks and listens, he was fully realized the inner demand of biblical faith. Therefore, the abyss between faith and philosophy should not be as deep as some had suggested. The attempted solution offered by Ratzinger will be the following, even though it might sound like a real provocation in the theological environment to which we alluded earlier. The appropriation of philosophy as carried out by the apologist was nothing other than the necessary interior function that complements the external process of the missionary preaching of the gospel to the peoples of the world. It is essential to the Christian message not to be an esoteric and secret doctrine addressed exclusively to a small group of initiates, but a message from God to all. Then it is also essential to Christianity to interpret it outwardly within the general language of human reason. The third requirement of the Christian faith cannot become visible in its magnitude and seriousness except through this link of union with what man has grasped in some way already beforehand, absolute. If Christianity rejects Gnosticism and Hermetic thought, then it clearly opts for reason and universality, just as the angelic doctor had done in his time. In this way, the relations between faith and philosophy will choose the path of ultimate harmony, despite their evident differences and divergences. And in this, he will recall the harmony between the two that Thomas Aquinas had proposed. For it is clear, if faith grabs the theological concept of God and says, the absolute of which you knew something and in some way is the absolute of which Jesus Christ speaks, who is the Word, and to whom it is possible to speak. Nevertheless, this does not imply abolish the difference between faith and philosophy, much less transform into faith what was hitherto philosophy. Philosophy remains rather something else with its own entity, to which faith refers. in order to express itself in it as the other thing, and thus to be able to make itself comprehensible. Difference and harmony between the two, therefore, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will be an available God at the same time that can be accessed perhaps in a more distant but real way through reason and knowledge. There is thus no abyss, but a bridge, perhaps quite long and somewhat risky to cross, but a bridge. The divine logos want to reckon with the human logos. However, the young professor from Bonn also proceeded to a approach to Brunner's position. In any case, it can and must be said here, although the appropriation of the philosophical concept of God by the apologists and the fathers was undoubtedly legitimate, indeed essentially necessary, it should also not be argued that this appropriation was not always being carried out with sufficient criticism. The critique therefore moves from personalist instances for the knowledge that God is person and self that goes out to meet a Jew, demands a revision of philosophical statements, a rethinking of them in a way that has not yet been conveniently realized. In this task of appropriation, a deeper concept of God, Catholic and Protestant theology, coming from different places, can meet again, says Ratzinger. He then proposes to take into account the Augustinian principle of verite faciem eius semper, intellige ut credas. The task of theology remains unfinished at this precise moment in the world. It consists in always asking for the face of God until he comes, and he himself is the answer to every question. The personalist tone of Ratzinger's theology has been recalled by Tura, Krieg, and Belandi, and in fact, Ratzinger further attempts to realize this philosophical synthesis between personalism and metaphysical thought. The third point is titled Thomas of the Creation. Together with this, Ratzinger will make a brief approach to spirituality, to the spiritual and sapiential dimension of theology. In the Church of the Piety of St. Augustine, 1961, Ratzinger shows that the usual contrast between the active and contemplative life represented in the figures of Martha and Mary, which Thomas supposedly takes from Augustine, it is not so. This doctrine will influence the theology of the ministry, which Aquinas interprets in accordance with the order of the states of the Middle Ages. The Bavarian professor was critical and distant this time about Thomistic interpretation. On the contrary, and following the interpretation of Gregory the Great, Ratzinger concludes that such facts prevent an excessive devaluation of the active life. The Greek Pope insists that no one can be perfect in contemplation if he does not count from the work of the active life. However, in 1975, Ratzinger referred again to the actuality and complementarity between Thomas and Bonaventure, since they were esteemed as much in their differences and in the aspects in which they coincide. The debate proper to scholasticism must be kept alive. Indeed, it is worth discussing some aspects. All the difference of approaches and temperaments unite to form a single unity which unites and redirects the present question to the question raised already in the 13th century. The complementarity of the two perspectives can serve to enrich each other, while at the same time revealing facets perhaps unknown to the other. During his year in Munster, the young professor of theology became good friends with his admired Joseph Pieper, a well-known and atypical Thomist. He met, says a chronicle of these years, every Saturday afternoon with Bishop Folk Lausberg the Romanist and Beckham the Latinist, and he also became a member of the club, to which Benedict XVI himself adds a personal assessment. Then people, like me, consider himself a progressive, someone who was looking for something new, for example, with an interpretation of Thomas Aquinas. In his lectures, he captivated the audience. He was in Munster what Guardini was in Munich. Indeed, his lectures were attended by crowds of students and professionals, laymen and experts, believers and non-believers. Pieper made good friends with Ratzinger, and they collaborated together in the ecumenical working circle, which is linked to Johann Adams Müller Institute in Paderborn. In a 2009 letter, the German Pope recalled that Joseph Pieper's book on the cardinal virtues were my first philosophical readings when I began my studies in 1946. They awakened in me a taste for philosophical thought, the joy of a rational search of the great questions of our life. The scholar of Thomas Aquinas knew how to season philosophical press with topical element and with an approachable style. Ratzinger also recalls how in those years he got to know him personally, and that since then he has always enjoyed his friendship, for which I can only be grateful. Later on, a new Thomistic theme would come up in a lecture delivered in Salzburg, also on the occasion of the Feast of St. Thomas, and entitled Consequences of the Doctrine of Creation, 1979, he started from the Thomistic doctrine of the origin of the world. Then he spoke of the title Thomas a Creatore, given to the Doctor Communis by the English writer Gilbert K. Chesterton, because creator and creation constitute the core of his theology, which indicates that Christian reflection on the ancient heritage only reached its goal with a full intellectual understanding of faith in creation. Creation and truth are bound together. Also, in a homily of the occasion of the 1st of January 28, 1987, delivered at the Angelicum University in Rome, referred to what he considered to be the core of Aquinas' thought. Consecrate them to the truth. St. Thomas summed up his whole life in these words of the Lord. He was alive in the truth, for the truth. The humble and constant service of the truth, his priestly ministry. Once again, the question of truth reappeared, to which the theme of creation is joined, and he alluded there again to the Chestertonian qualification one for presented the correlate between God and Logos, that is the inner truth of the creatures. As a consequence, philosophy thus becomes a necessity for theology. Respect for autonomy is implied in faith because truth consecrates. The courage of truth is the consequence of faith in God the Creator. And the fourth and last point is entitled The Faith and the Theology. But in addition to the themes of truth and creation, Ratzinger turned to Thomas to address theological methodology. In a 1993 text delivered in the occasion of a congress in Rome on the teachings on the then blessed Jose Maria Escrivá, Ratzinger recalled to the scientific and sapiential character of the theology. Theology, science in the full sense of the word, is in fact the exercise of scientific reason. However, it was also opportune to speak of the reality of heaven. Indeed, it is necessary, for only in this way can theology be understood. Thomas Aquinas repeated it in a famous and widely repeated formula. Theology is the science subordinate to the science of God and the blessed. The theologian must be a man of science, but also, as a theologian, man of prayer. He must be attentive to the succession of history and the progress of science, but also, even more so, to the testimony of those who, having traveled to the end, the path of prayer, have reached already on earth the high summits of divine intimacy, to the testimony, in short, of those whom we are accustomed to call saints. This is not a pious recommendation, but a methodological requirement. After a long and arduous journey, science culminates in the vision that others already possess in a more direct way as a gift received directly from God. Wisdom and holiness are thus at the very heart of theology, which is conceived as a science subordinate to the wisdom of God and of the saints. This also implies a reference to the vital union with God, which is already possible on earth for those who, opening themselves in faith to the divine word, embrace it not only with their intelligence, but also with their whole heart. For God it is at once and inseparably truth, godness, and beauty, and the unitive power of love leads not only to allowing oneself to be transfixed by his goodness, but also to the deepening of his truth. Similarly, on the occasion of the awarding of an honorary doctorate in 2000 at the University of Breslau, the present-day Poland, the theologian prefect made a new approach to the question of faith as rational knowledge, which could well serve as a summary of the present section. He started from the usual language when one says, for example, I believe that tomorrow the weather will be fine, or I believe that this or that news does not tell the truth. When the word believe here is equivalent to think, to give an opinion. It expresses an imperfect form of knowledge. We speak here of faith where it has not attained the status of certain and rigorous knowledge. In fact, many people think that this meaning of faith is also valid in the religious sphere, and that therefore the context of Christian faith are a prior and imperfect level of knowledge. However, this is not the usual meaning of the main word we repeat in the creed. In reality, for Christian believers, the expression I believe indicates an absolutely peculiar certainty, in some respects greater than that of science. But of course, it also carries within itself a moment of shadow and image, a moment of not yet. Thought and assent, at the same time, intelligence and will, knowledge and freedom, duly integrated in short as Aquinas maintained. Assent is caused by the will, not by direct understanding of the understanding. In this consists the particular form of free will in the decision by faith. Cetera potest homo nolens, credere non nisi volens. St. Thomas quotes St. Augustine for this. Everything else man can do without willing it, but faith can only attain it voluntarily. This statement now shows the particular spiritual structure of faith, which is not only an act of the intellect, but in which all the spiritual powers of the persons converge. Moreover, man carries out faith in his own self and never outside of it. It has a dialogical character by nature, thus emphasizing the relational character of the act of faith. It is only because the foundation of the soul, the heart, is touched by God, that the whole structure of the spiritual powers is set in motion and converges in the yes of faith. When the heart comes into contact with the Logos of God, with the incarnate Word, it touches that intimate point of existence. The theology of the Logos that Ratzinger develops makes its appearance here once again. Knowledge by faith thus proceeds from the prior trust that one places in the one who can make him worthy of a higher knowledge. That is, a relationship that increases my knowledge. If one accepts and trusts in the logos, one's own logos will be profoundly enriched. After assent, it comes the inescapable task of thought, we said. The will, the heart, therefore, first enlightens the understanding and introduces it with it into assent. This is how thought also begins to see through love. This is why faith does not arise from understanding, but from hearing. Fidex ex audito, says St. Paul, thinking that thinking has not yet reached its end, nor has it yet found its stillness. Contemplation always comes at the end of a strenuous effort. Here it is shown in a totally peculiar way that faith is a pilgrimage of thought that is still on the way. From this, St. Thomas also concludes that in faith, despite the firmness of assent, a contrary movement, modus e contrario, can arise. It remains a thought that struggles and questions, that has to seek its light again and again from the essential light that shines in the heart through the Word of God. Assent and reflective movement are somehow quasi-balanced ex aequo. Assent and reflection, trust and knowledge remain on equal footing in the act of faith, which is at once firm and uncertain. At no time does the will override the understanding, but rather poses new challenges to it. Hence, this continuous character of pilgrimage in faith, which will succeed in overcoming doubt and lead the believer to the faith given by Jesus Christ and guarded in the Church. Theologians find a very useful reference in the common faith of the Church. The German cardinal proposed to unite this with the theology, also in its interior analogy. The essence of theology, continued in 2000 in Breslau, can only be understood from the essence of faith. The faith of a whole church predisposes us to theology and anticipates that we cannot yet see or have. This prevision set us in motion, for we must go after it. As assent and trust go before it, so must try to reach it, and it must also overcome the contrary movement, the modus e contrario. This is the situation of faith, since man finds himself in history. That is why all history must give rise to theology. The task of theology in history remains unfinished. Thought remains on pilgrimage as we ourselves are on pilgrimage. And we do not really go on pilgrimage if our thought does not go on pilgrimage. For faith is the goal toward which theology journeys. It starts from faith, but it is up to it to continue this whole rational and historical itinerary, which must always lead back to the faith of the Church. Together with the unalienable personal dimension of faith, Ratzinger recalls to the ecclesial dimension. In this way, reason, history, and theology will also find themselves intimately united in the Church. Hearing, on the other hand, does not seem to agree with the proposed balance between Church and theology, and accuses our author of lacking an understanding of the historical critical background of all theology. The practical repercussions of these affirmations for theology will be great. Theology deals with God, but interrogates in the manner of philosophy, we said. This metaphysical ontological commitment of theology, there is not, contrary to what we have seen fearing for a long time, a betrayal of salvation history, while the contrary, if theology wants to be faithful to its historical starting point, to the salvific event in Christ witnessed in the Bible, it must go beyond history and dedicate itself in the last analysis to God. If it wants to prove its fidelity to the practical content of the gospel, the salvation of man, it must first of all be ciencia speculativa and cannot be directly a ciencia práctica. It must postulate the primacy of a truth that rests on itself and for whose very being it must first ask itself, before even assessing its practical usefulness for human endeavors. Theology must over ethos, of orthodoxy over orthopraxis. And this position, he concludes, is found in Thomas Aquinas as well in Bonaventure. The Dominican Aidan Nichols established the following verdict in this regard. Ratzinger's sympathy for Bonaventure and the Franciscan school should not be regarded as anti-Thomistic. Indeed, Ratzinger has expressed himself on the subject of Thomas with a good deal more warmth than a formal ceremony requires. So thank you very much for your attention and your patience.
Thank you very much, Don Pablo. Thank you very much for this great presentation. We have already one question in the chat, so I will read it in Spanish and then translate it for the ones that speak in English. Saludos, Don Pablo, muchas gracias por su presencia, dice Rafael Silva. Para San Buenaventura, en Colaciones in Hexameron, la fe cura las enfermedades del alma. Para Ratzinger, en Dialéctica de la Secularización, la religión cura las patologías de la razón. ¿Habría influencia de San Buenaventura en esta concepción ratzingeriana de la fe y la razón y la religión? So he says, saludos, Don Pablo, thank you very much for your presentation. For San Bonaventure, in Colaciones in Hexameron, faith heals the sickness of the soul. For Ratzinger, in the Dialectic of Secularization, religion heals the pathologies of reason. Would there be an influence of San Bonaventure in this conception of Ratzinger of faith and reason, of reason and religion?
Okay, may I answer in English or Spanish?
However you choose.
Okay.
As you may.
I'm going to try to answer in English. Okay, I'm not an expert on Bonaventure. I do not know very well his thought. I only know what Ratzinger took from Bonaventure. But this is an interesting parallelism. This, so to say, the role of the religion and also of the theology as a therapy for the reason. That was also said in this debate between Habermas and Ratzinger that our speaker has mentioned. So how the religion is able to purify and to heal the reason from their pathologies, but at the same time, also the reason heals the religion, because sometimes the religion can fall in the fanaticism and the fundamentalism. So in this way, the reason can purify also the religion, because sometimes the religion gets so human elements that do not belong to the essence of religions, or are not elements given by God to that religion. But at the same time, as Ratzinger and Habermas were in synchrony in this point, also the religion can heal the reason, because, for example, the modern reason has fall also in some pathologies. For example, Auschwitz, or the Hiroshima, or the Chernobyl are a very good examples of the effects of the modern reason, of the defects, we must say, of the modern reason. So in this sense, I do not know if this idea comes from Bonaventure, or I haven't read something about this, no? But I think this could be also a point in which this coincidence between Ratzinger and Bonaventure could also be useful. But the most interesting point that in that point, Habermas could also be in agreement with Bonaventure. That would be also a good news. Yeah.
Thank you, Don Pablo. I, for myself, have one question. I talk a bit in behalf of one of my students that is working. I know that she was here some minutes ago, but I think that she had to leave. She will nevertheless see the recording later. So she's working on a thesis about the foundations of the state, the pre-political foundations of the state, and truth as the basis of freedom. So one of her chapters will be about truth. What is truth? You mentioned before that creation and truth are born together. But what is the concept of truth working here? How about, for example, pre-created truth, God as truth, that is non-created truth? Or how about concept of existence without God, and a materialistic or irrational existence without logos? Would there be truth in some sense there as mere existence, or does existence needs something else in order to be considered as truth? What is truth for Ratzinger?
Okay, we have seen that according to Ratzinger, for Aquinas, the truth was very, very, very important. Was the heart of his thought, and this passion for truth is also the reason because we can see all the Aquinas thought as a Unitarian, as a unity, as a whole. And also we can remember how Ratzinger speaks about the dictature of relativism. So the truth for him is a refuge a common ground for everyone, and also a protection from the arbitrarity of the totalitarianism. So, from the point of view of the foundation of the states, this truth is also a guarantee for all the citizens and for all the people, and it's also a guarantee for the equality between all men and women. But as I understand the Ratzinger's development or foundation of the truth is, I used to explain it with the prologue of St. John. In the beginning was the Logos. And in the third versicle, we can read, and everything was made through him, and nothing was made without him. And we follow in this prologue in the versicle 14, and the Logos was made flesh. So in the first Logos, we are speaking about the second person of the Trinity, the Verb, the Verbo. But if we go to the third versicle, everything was made about the Logos. That means that all creation has the footstep of the Logos. So all the creatures have a Logos inside, a grammar, a language. And if we speak about the human being, we can say that there is a natural law for all men and women. So the foundation of this interior truth, this Logos, this interior Logos, to every creature, especially in the human creature, is in the divine Logos, the Logos with a big L. And if we follow to the 14th versicle, and the Logos was made flesh, we can understand that this Logos remains also in our nature. So we participate to the understanding of God. We have also a Logos, the Greek Logos, the reason. And with this reason, we can understand not only the interior Logos of all creation and all creatures, but also we can understand God. Maybe we cannot reach without the revelation to the incarnate Logos, but we can surely, that's important in Aquinas, in Augustine, and Bonaventure, and also in Ratzinger, we can know God through our human intelligence. And also that can be seen in the moral, in the ethics. We have a conscience, and with that conscience, we can discover this natural law that we have inside. So I think that in Ratzinger, I have written an article about this, are these three meanings of Logos. The divine Logos, in the beginning was the Logos, and the interior Logos of all creatures, and also the human Logos, understood as the human reason. And they are all linked, they are all united. And in this sense, the foundations of the Logos with a small l is in the divine Logos, the logos with a big L.
Thank you very much. I think that perhaps we have time for one more question if someone wants to ask something.
Yes. May I have a question? This is Gabriel. How are you?
Hello, Gabriel.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
It's a briefly question. Thank you, first of all, for the Dr. Blanco for your nice presentation. I'm very excited. Do you believe that in the prophecy that our Pope, the Emerite Pope, made before that he left the papacy, that the new modern that you speak, the new modern is taking the man far away from the God? The modern, like the money, like the technology, like the entertainment, is taking the future history of the human being to be very, very far away from God. Do you believe that this is happening now, for example, in Europe?
Well, in Europe are happening now good and bad things, we can say. We have, in fact, decadence, but we have also an ancient Christian culture. And in this sense, we have also a big hope. I think this hope is also a way for understanding Ratzinger. Ratzinger is not maybe a natural optimist. I do not know very well his psychology, but he needs not to be an enthusiastic, so to say. But I'm sure that he's a man who is full of supernatural hope. He speaks about the Hoffnung principle, no? The principle of the hope, and he has written a big, some texts very interesting about hope, about eschatology, and also this beautiful encyclica about the hope. So it's evident that in Europe there is a decadence. There are also bad news, but at the same time, we can find also a real hope because of the resurrection of Christ. I would tell at last an anecdote of one interview that made Vittorio Messori. He wrote this book, Ratzinger's Report in English, I think it is. And at the end, he made a question that not included in this book. And I think the question is a very good question from the journalistical point of view, because he asked to the prefect of the congregation of the faith, the faith congregation, where arrives all the problems of the church. So Messori asked to Ratzinger, to Cardinal Ratzinger, in that moment, "You sleep well?" And he answered that Ratzinger remained a little astonished, and at the end he answered, "Well, when I have done my examination of conscience and I have prayed my prayers of the night, I sleep perfectly, because I know that the church belongs to Jesus Christ and not to us." I think this is an expression of the Ratzinger's supernatural hope And I'm sure that he's very conscious of the problems and the decadence, but as every Christian, he's also well-founded in the hope of the resurrection of Christ and the final victory of Jesus Christ. No, I do not know if I have answered.
No, thank you, thank you, thank you very well. Was a very light in my question. Thank you, Father.
Okay.
Thank you, Don Pablo. There is one more question in the chat. Perhaps Juan Manuel, do you want to ask it yourself, or should I read it for you? I will read it. He says, Dante's Commedia.
I think
Let me see what is. Okay, let me read this. He says, Dante's Commedia, following Thomas Aquinas' Summa, places the pilgrim in a journey of enlightenment and purification in which spiritual improvement by means of liturgy allows for further enlightenment, involving a dialectic Dionysius the Areopagites, mystic theology. What is Ratzinger take on knowledge by love?
Okay, interesting. Dante says that all the universe is moved by love, I think, no? Yeah. Well, I see that we have here very good experts about Thomas and Dante's, much better than I am. But I have also the impression, the intuition that for Aquinas and also for Ratzinger, the love comes before. The love is the eye that permits us to see and to understand better the truth. We can understand this in an intuitive sense that what was said also by John Henry Newman, a good friend of Ratzinger, apropos. He said, we believe because we love. And we can translate this sentence saying, we know better if we love. The love makes us understand better the reality. We can make a comparison also in daily life when we do not love a person or we have a distance with a person, we cannot know him or her better. We have problem for knowing him. Leonardo da Vinci said that real knowledge is the son of a real love. The big love is the son of a big knowledge. But it's also the contrary is true. So we can understand, I think also that Ratzinger understands in the same way, if I'm not mistaken, that the love makes us understand better the truth, and also the truth help us to understand better the love. I think the first chapter of the encyclica Caritas in Veritate explains this in a very well way, in an excellent way. So if I have not expressed myself so well, you can reread this first chapter of the Caritas in Veritate, and I think the answer is there.
Thank you, Don Pablo. Do you have time for one more question? Lucimelda has raised her hand.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Don Pablo.
Muchas gracias, don Pablo. Muchas gracias por la exposición. Mi pregunta va en la línea de si, siguiendo lo que todo lo que según lo que usted nos está explicando, me parece que Ratzinger sigue muy de cerca pues la concepción de Santo Tomás de teología y de filosofía, la autonomía de la razón de la filosofía. Es un tema que me acuerdo que cuando habló en la audiencia sobre Santo Tomás, de hecho Ratzinger habla de ella, ¿no? Como una cosa, como una de las aportaciones de Santo Tomás y que hay que seguirla, ¿no? Entonces yo quería preguntarle si usted estaría de acuerdo con eso, con que Ratzinger está totalmente de acuerdo con ese concepto de teología y de filosofía, y también con pues que yo lo encuentro muy, muy bien dicho en la Fides et Ratio, ¿no? Como esa relación entre filosofía y teología. Si esa relación usted estaría de acuerdo, pues obvio entiendo con todo el tema de pues toda la aportación de San Buenaventura, ¿no? Que lleva a unas aportaciones sobre el tema del amor y de la cuestión práctica, etcétera, ¿no? Pero bueno, quería saber su opinión sobre este tema que me interesa mucho.
Bien, voy a contestar en castellano, porque...
Gracias. Perdón que sí hice la pregunta en español y ya no pregunté. Pero mejor Alejandro la puede.
¿Quiere preguntar en inglés? ¿Quiere formularla en inglés o
Preferiría
responde?
sí.
No, yo creo que ya está bien. Sí, en español está bien.
Bien.
Gracias, Alejandro. Ok.
Entonces, lo que iba a decir es que tiene que preguntar a Alejandro Sada, que es el experto en este tema, pero por mi parte yo puedo adelantar lo que hice en el no pronunciado discurso La Sapienza, cuando habla de la filosofía y la teología como hermanas gemelas, donde se expresa tanto la unidad, la profunda sintonía que existe entre ambas, al mismo tiempo que la alteridad, que la diversidad entre las dos, ¿no? O sea que son distintas pero no distantes. Puede haber una verdadera colaboración, ¿no? Usted ha puesto muy bien el ejemplo de la Fides et Ratio, ¿no? Que en el fondo hay una gran sintonía y de hecho pone a Santo Tomás como un ejemplo de alguien que alcanzó esa sintonía entre filosofía y teología. Pero a mí me parece interesante por lo que ha mencionado usted de la autonomía de la filosofía. O sea, Ratzinger no habla de la filosofía como esclava, Ancile Theologiae, ¿no? Como esclava de la teología. Y en esto cita a Santo Tomás. Como Santo Tomás también entiende y defiende esta autonomía de la filosofía, quizá con una visión más omniabarcante o menos, separada o distinguida que podía tener Buenaventura. O sea, Tomás de Aquino defiende la filosofía y yo creo que Ratzinger también. O sea, en ese sentido, son dos gemelas. No es una la señora y la otra la esclava, sino que son dos hermanas gemelas que se deben entender muy bien como los gemelos, ¿no? Que suelen tener una sintonía que incluso responden a la vez a lo mismo, ¿no? Entonces, en ese sentido, bueno, yo creo que el mirar en la misma dirección, a pesar de la diferencia y la alteridad, pues creo que es un buen modelo para ese diálogo en la diferencia entre la filosofía y la teología.
Perfecto. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Don Pablo. So I think this is it for today. Thank you very much for this very nice talk and very nice conversation as well. You spoke about Joseph Pieper and the friendship that they held together, Ratzinger and Pieper. So I will pre-announce that very soon a very interesting person, Hannah Barbara, will speak to us about this relationship between Joseph Pieper and Joseph Ratzinger. She has access to the correspondence that they held together, and I think that for Deus Caritas Est, Pope Benedict XVI and Pieper wrote to each other, interchanging ideas. So I will soon give you news on this forthcoming event of this seminar. And already a couple of people have asked me if I can send to them the recording and the text, if it may be possible. So perhaps you can then send it to me, Don Pablo, and I can distribute it to the people that want to see this again, or read a text that you kindly shared with us today. Thank you very much.
To you. A pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye.
Gracias a todos. Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias. Adiós. Gracias, Alejandro. Gracias, doctor.
Thank you.
Bye. A ustedes.
Adiós.
Adiós,
Tengan
amigos.
buen día.
Bye.
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 Goodbye. Tschüss.